I'm so glad to be back doing another one of these videos. It's been a while. I've noticed that I tend to post on this channel only once every few months. I'm learning to be okay with that. Maybe now that undergrad is finished, I just graduated. I think my relationship with reading can become a bit more intentional, less about volume and more about just like deep reading. I went to school for English. It was the degree that I've wanted since I was like very young. I'm so grateful for the demand that was placed on me. I feel that I was held to a very high standard. And academia is just like kind of like not really that replicable in the world outside of academia. So I'm sure in some time I'll begin to feel nostalgic for it all. But in the meantime, I'm just so grateful that I get to return to reading, in a more intuitive way and in like less of a formal setting. Today I'm actually reviewing a book that I read for my 19th century studies class. I'm reviewing Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy. There's infinite things to say about this book. I wouldn't be making a video about it otherwise. I find Hardy's writing to be really immediate. I felt like it pressed up against me while I was reading this book. Jude, the protagonist, I think is a character that like you would have to be bereft of like any sense of loss or any empathy to not appreciate this character. When we meet Jude, Jude's schoolmaster is embarking to a fictional town called Christminster. And the schoolmaster talks about Christminster glowingly, very much like speaks of it as like a cultural center and a center for free thinking folk, a center for higher minded people. This is the singular impression from which the whole book happens. This novel is very much set up in terms of like class and the barriers that class produces. The tension in Jude's life comes from the fact that he aspires to be a scholar, and later a clergyman, and he is rebuffed in his attempts to transcend his class situation. I'm trying to figure out how to like review this book without like spoiling it too much. When my classmates and I discussed this book, we all kind of came to the conclusion that Thomas Hardy, the author, feels very reflected in the book, particularly in the characters. As it's almost as if the characters are different facets of one struggle. And it's not that they're not fleshed out, and it's not that they don't have interiority. They do. It almost feels as if they're just like siloed in like one like revolving world of pain. And I think that that's a pretty apt way to describe this book, because I feel that it's about the inescapability of suffering, and Thomas Hardy was extremely angry when he wrote this, and it feels like a polemic, like not only against just like an existence where we're condemned to pain, but also a polemic against a society that crushes our best instincts. I consider Jude a character who embodies a lot of innocence. And I don't mean that he doesn't feel consequences for his actions, because he does. He feels them weightily. Jude, I think, is someone who's really motivated by ideals, and he strives to be learned, and he strives to move upward in society. And I think a character who struggles to be satisfied is just, it's eternally relatable. The human spirit craves like novelty and change, and to emulate God through change. And I think that that's all that Jude is guilty of. But he's punished for it, and the title Jude the Obscure has made me reflect on like what are the obscurities in this book. And I think one of those obscurities is the obscure dread that the obscure dread of like our lives being predetermined and not being able to break out of our fate. I think also Jude is obscure in that he's ignored. And he's obscure in that he doesn't really subscribe to society's bullshit. Especially Victorian society's bullshit. This novel was like haughtily referred to when it came out as Jude the Obscene. And I won't say why that is. You'll just have to read the book. But I mean, this novel does a lot with conventions around sexuality and gender and marriage and religion. I think Hardy wants us to know that the people who are rewarded in society, those who are most legible within it, are the selfish people. Certainly Jude possesses some selfishness, but Jude is driven by individualism and not by greed. This is a book that I've been recommending to a lot of my loved ones. I had the Broadview editions of this book. I had the Broadview edition of this book, and I gave it to my dad. It's like an annotated version with an appendix and like a long introduction. Hardy's writing is, apart from like crafting an amazing story and writing characters and scenes that had me on the verge of tears, apart from that, Hardy's writing style is, I would say, elegant. The prose very much feels like it wrote itself. There are a few books, mostly classics, classics that feel like biblical in magnitude to me. East of Eden is one of those. Frankenstein is one of those, and I would consider this one of those as well. So yeah, I'm currently listening to an audiobook of Tess of the Dubervilles. That's another one of Hardy's books, and I'm just listening to the audiobook until I can get a physical copy. Just after reading Hardy, I found myself just like craving more Hardy. Thanks for watching. I'm so glad to be back at this. I greatly missed posting while I was finishing up my last semester. I just like to remind people that I'm 34 and that I finished undergrad at 34, and that there's no shame in that, and that it's possible, and that if you want a degree, you should consider it yours to obtain. A lot of colleges offer accommodations and accessibility programs these days, so in some ways there are more barriers, in other ways there are fewer barriers, but I encourage anyone to just not accept what society tells you your limitations are, or that you're too far behind, or that you're too old. Yeah, feels very thematic to this book, so bye for now.